So I think we'll begin, folks. So hello and welcome to today's roundtable on direct sourcing, where we are delighted to be joined by, I hope it's okay to say this, gentlemen, three of the world's foremost experts and practitioners in the fields of direct sourcing and talent marketplaces. So I'm joined by an old friend, Thomas Jajeh from Randstad, who's currently the Chief Digital Officer at Randstad Soureright and the founder and CEO at leading marketplace twago. Thomas, so good to see you. Thank you very much for supporting our roundtables, and it's great to have you back. Thank you. Appreciate it. Also joined by Roland Rosevear, who heads up enterprise sales and solutions at leading talent marketplace and public talent marketplace, freelancer.com, which, if latest statistics are to be accepted, has around 50 million plus people on their platform. So Roland, great to see you. Thanks so much for attending today. Really looking forward to your insights in this really emerging field for the enterprise. Thank you.
Thank you, Connor. And it's 56 million, I think, up to date number. So you're 6 million out. Nearly there. What's 6 million between friends?
56 million. Well, that's good. It's the right platform to know. I was going off the International Labour Report on digital labour platform, so I suppose it's 1 year out of date. And last but not least, we're also joined by Saleem Khaja. Saleem is the COO and co-founder of WorkLlama. Saleem, great to see you. WorkLlama, for those of you who don't know, is a leading global builder and platform of talent communities, something that we're going to be speaking about today. So a warm welcome to you all. This is our last webinar and series on direct sourcing. This is our last of 6 that we've held over 2021. We've looked at such areas as the business case build for direct sourcing, how to implement direct sourcing, and of course some of the challenges that direct sourcing programs face in terms of getting off the ground. So really excited to hear what Thomas, Roland, and Saleem have to say today. And we're going to be touching on talent marketplaces, which is why we've got Roland here and Thomas, of course, and also direct sourcing. So some of the challenges that direct sourcing can bring, some of the best practices, how we can collectively solve the labor market paradox. So guys, if you could all mute your lines, would really appreciate that. My colleague from our marketing team, who's also called Connor, his name is Connor Lavelle. He will be monitoring the chat function and will be taking the most pertinent questions. Hopefully we can answer as many questions as possible in the short time that we've got today. If not, we'll certainly follow up with you directly post this particular roundtable. So I'm going to start with our first discussion point. And Thomas, I hope you don't mind if we can come to you, because you've got significant experience in the direct sourcing and talent pool field specifically. And we'd love to hear your views in terms of what are some of the best practices that an organization can do when they're seeking to build a direct sourcing program.
Yeah, I thank you, Connor, for having me, and thank you for the warm introduction as well. It's a very broad question, of course, but I think direct sourcing in general is I would consider it already as a best practice, although the adoption is still very low, as we will see later on. I believe in times of talent scarcity and the labor market paradox that that they will also elaborate on later. Companies must start using their employer brand to attract and engage with workers, and not just hope that a random supplier that where we don't know how they treat the workers and how they communicate with the workers will bring the right candidate at the right time. I think it's a missed opportunity for many companies that they don't use their employer brand. And so in terms of best practices, then what you have to do in your direct sourcing program is you have to establish like you do in perm and a value proposition towards your contingent workers that resonates with them, that is warm, that so the marketing piece of it is not to underestimate. It is not a purely reactional sourcing strategy where you go out and say, hey, I need a job for client XYZ. It is really a more strategic approach to sourcing, building a relationship, building, making your brand attractive towards contingent workers. And there's usually technology deployed. We have Saleem here, but there are various talent pooling solutions that help to present your employer brand and engage with contingent workers, in a very efficient way. I think that if there's one thing that I would want to share, then don't treat contingent talent as toilet paper. Enter a requisition into a VMS and then hope for the cheapest bid. Really engage with talent in an emotional way, and then build long-lasting relationships and go from reactive sourcing to proactive nurturing of talent communities.
But and Thomas, I'm going to come on to Saleem in a second, but I think if we look at the outsourced sector, if you think of staffing, recruitment, talent pooling, talent communities, RPO, MSP, project sourcing, talent marketplaces like freelancer.com, the list is bloody endless, right? And I suppose we've all been guilty, I suppose, in this call of making what should be simple quite complex, really, right? Multiple touch points, multiple processes. But if you think about sourcing or recruiting at its fundamental, the biggest problem I think with it is that it's reactionary, right? It's last in time. It's not even just in time. It's last in time. Organizations and enterprises get the talent they need at the very last minute, right? So I suppose my question to you, Thomas, and Saleem and Roland, is what can we do, apart from utilizing direct sourcing, to actually move us from reactionary to proactive? And does resource demand planning have a significant role to play in this?
Saleem, do you want to go first or me? Okay. I believe it does. It is a bit, I haven't seen many companies get that right. So because there's, look at the last 3 years and how, things developed a little bit different than we have anticipated. So long business cases, with demand planning is very difficult. But what I think MSPs or also RPO providers in the perm field, what they can do is, they can work with hiring managers and looking at shorter term pipelines. Probably nobody knows what talent, or not many people know what talent they will need in 2023. But if you look at the next few months, you might get an idea. You can look at churn, historical churn in your organization. You have a Java developer team of 100 people. How much turnover have you had over the last years? Then you can already predict that you will have churn in the future. And so there are some measures that you can do to go from a more, and that you should do, to go from a more reactive approach. Oh, now we have a termination. Oh, what a surprise, right? And we need to find a substitute. You can probably, address that more proactively. But if you want to be really scientific about it, I've seen very scientific approaches to demand planning and workforce planning in particular, but I haven't seen a lot of very precise scientific approaches there. So the more scientific you get, the more uncertainty you have usually in those models. So I found what's very helpful is the midterm and the retro perspective view on your workforce. You can look at your typical churn, you can look at your typical turnover and then predict for the future. You can talk to hiring managers, of course, what's coming up, and you can do that. And then if you identify groups, you can start building talent communities, building pipelines, particularly in the contingent place, because we will need to re-engage with those users again and again and again.
Yeah, I think there's, I agree with everything Thomas just said, right? There seems to be a disconnect between the overall core business planning functions and the business strategy and roadmap that your organization has. And there is a misalignment with them and talent acquisition teams, right? So that whole function is now evolving, and now you throw in the mix of contingent labor, and there's also a lack of visibility within the organization, right? Where, which type of labor is being used to solve the overall business objectives. So like Thomas said, if you try to make it a science, it gets, it really doesn't work, because you are in a very dynamic business environment where things change, right? So first of all, having that alignment internally in terms of understanding what the business objectives are from a short-term and a long-term standpoint, right? And then aligning those, that process that the leaders have with their talent acquisition teams will help to a certain extent, right? So yeah, it's not a science. It's going to take a while, and obviously, the more organizations start embracing the whole total talent management type of solutions, it'll start getting easier. In fact, sometimes it's very surprising that Fortune 500 companies struggle, the HR functions struggle with leveraging their data in order to even assess what the turnover is by role types and job types and departments. So it's still too early to make it a science right now.
Yeah, I think though, if we could crack this problem, it would really help the adoption of direct sourcing and other sourcing strategies. Because if you think about it in this respect, right? So let's say Ford went out to market each month to get ball bearings, right? That wouldn't be a very effective way of them building cars. Now, Thomas, I take your point that we can't procure people the way that we procure pencils, but I do think that we can learn from our colleagues in supply chain and look at some of how they plan and meet supply and demand. I'm not saying we replicate those principles, but I think there's a case to be made that we can learn from how organizations like Heineken, Ford, Budweiser marry supply and demand for their particular product. But I take your point.
Yeah, so actually, Connor, the fact that problem exists actually enforces the need to have a direct sourcing type of model, right? Where you're curating, nurturing, and maintaining those relationships. So when you do have these uncertainties, right, you have a quicker way to go source talent in a timely manner. I know further down we'll talk about is cost the core driver, but I think we are kind of already leading this conversation down that path. Sorry, Thomas, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to say that I think, Connor, you're right. And I think, if you get that right, you can probably, get 70% of your demand like organized, and then the 30% peaks that you have, because, it happens in our industry where I talk to a client that they need, they tell me in January, we need 700 people, let's say. And then, 1 week later, we meet them again and they say, well, everything has changed. We need 3,000. Right. So these things are unpredictable, and I can do as much planning as I want. If there's a big contract signed or, something not happening, then this has impact on labor force. So I think a certain amount of flexibility will always be needed. And I'm with Saleem, if you have if you have relationships with contingent workers that you can build upon in sourcing, then you'll be quicker to react to those peaks. But still, you can get probably your 70%, business as usual. You can do much better than most of the companies do today.
Yeah, I think that's fair comment, Thomas and Saleem, actually. And Roland, I know we're talking about direct sourcing here, but in the world of large scale talent marketplaces like freelancer.com, do you think resource demand planning has a role to play in your world, or is your world really about on-demand management of resource need?
It certainly has a huge part to play. And I think the key, though, is each business is different from one another. And also each skills within a business are also very different than one another. And you've got to ask yourself, are these the kind of, for our platform, there's a lot of very short duration, high speed hires that are needed. And some of those hires might be for a one-off task where that resource might never be needed again. There's other parts in that business where that it's so important to build these long-term relationships with freelancers who are going to return again and again, because they're the ones who are really efficient, who already understand your business, who can take on half a day's worth of work without needing a day to plan ahead of that half day. And that's where you really have to have these kind of engagement strategies and ways of communicating with this talent pool when you're not offering them work. Because you might only want them once every couple of years, but how do you keep those touch points in the meantime, and how do you keep that relationship with the company?
Yeah. And Roland, in the world of talent marketplaces, does the employer brand, in terms of, let's say you're working with big, I don't want to name company names here in case we offend anyone or jeopardize any business relationships, but let's say big bank A is the most attractive bank in the world to work for or work with. In the world of freelancer.com, is that employer brand a key component in attracting the talent into your platform, but also to go and work with big bank A?
So it's definitely important, but if you rated it, in importance related to your, permanent employer value proposition, it's in a different league. People are a lot less worried about the employer branding. What people are worried about more are getting involved with negative businesses which conflict with their own moral compass, whether it might be, alcohol related or some kind of industry that they're not keen on. So there's more detractors rather than attractors, we find. But people, big brands, always do attract people, but not as to the same extent. It's more the experience they have working for that brand, rather than the marketing of that brand. How easy was the individual hiring manager to work with? What kind of relationship did they build up? What was the type of work that they're doing? That's more important than some of the brand elements. Gotcha. And I'm just wondering if there's and thanks, Roland, that's a really interesting viewpoint. Thomas, Saleem, would you agree or disagree with I'm sensing there might be some disagreement with Roland's statement there in the world of direct sourcing anyway.
I think you set us up here, Connor. Huh? No, I have to admit I don't disagree with Roland. I think I just want to put it into a perspective, at least from my view. I can't speak for freelancer.com, but I think you have to look at the type of labor and the type of job that's been done. And on those gig marketplaces, you look at freelancer.com, Upwork, those people have typically throughout a year, they have relationships with tens, if not hundreds of companies, partly very short gigs, working for a day, 2, 3 a week, creating something. And then the employer brand plays less a role. I think in that context, the usability of a freelancer.com, the quality of projects that come in, the ease of use, and the relationship to freelancer.com play a much bigger role than actually, the one client that you work 1 week for. If you go to, and then I would also not suggest to do talent pooling for those type of resources. I think marketplaces are better equipped to solve those problems. When it comes to we need an SAP R3 specialist that works for 18 months with Philips on site, that's not the type of resource that you get via freelancer.com. And these people typically seek to have a relationship with an employer. They don't want to work through an intermediary. They want to know, they want to work on something meaningful because the employer is the one they identify with. It's not the marketplace they engage with. So I think what Ronald said is not wrong. And I think what we're typically saying, that the employer brand plays a very important role, is not wrong either. You just have to look at the type of talent you're trying to engage.
Okay, thanks. Saleem, what's your thoughts on this non-thorny matter?
No, I think, my point of view is it doesn't matter what type of resource what type of work arrangement a resource has with your company. If that experience is not consistent, right, you're still impacting your employer brand. So it does matter, right? Especially in this market where resources have so many different options, right? Why would they want to go work? It doesn't matter what the work arrangement is. If they're not treated well, the experience is not consistent with what the brand keeps promoting as their core ethos is, right? It does impact, because if you think about, your work arrangement through a freelancer marketplace may be one thing, and if it is bad experience for the person and they go write about it somewhere else, your contingent workforce or permanent employees who are trying to come work for you, right, will have visibility into that, which will impact. So at a transactional level, it may not matter, but overall, does it impact your employer brand? Yes, it does. And, you need to be sure and you need to put in a deliberate effort to make sure that you're accurately reflecting your employer brand across all work arrangements. It doesn't matter what it is. And if, like Thomas originally said, right, initially, where if you're going to be leveraging your brand to attract talent through your own sourcing channel, which is direct sourcing, then you better be concerned about how your employer brand is reflected across every single channel.
And I would totally agree. I didn't mean to say that it's not important. I think you have to treat any talent, and if the experience is crap, the experience is crap, and then over time this will hurt your employer brand significantly. Yeah. I think what Ronald was trying to say is that if the experience is not crap, right, then the employer brand for those gig type of jobs, if your brand is not seen as a detractor, then it plays a smaller role in the choice than it does in a longer term assignment and a talent pool for a company. But still, every experience with every talent should be positive, from an employer brand perspective, I would say.
Yeah. And guys, just thinking about the end user brand instead of an employer brand, I see a great question there from Hitomi Siguraki, I think, and apologies if I've clearly mispronounced your name, which we'll come to in a second. But in my experience, and I'm going to address this one to Thomas and Saleem, one of the biggest difficulties of getting a direct sourcing deal across the line with clients has been the use of the employer brand. And I suppose my question is twofold. Would you agree with that, number one? And number two, does direct sourcing work without use of the client's brand? Thomas?
Yeah, I thought I went first with the previous question. I give Saleem the space now.
No worries.
Yeah. I mean, without using an employer brand, you're trying to do direct sourcing. It's just another model of sourcing through a supplier, right? I mean, what exactly are you doing that's different? The whole power of the direct sourcing being a channel to attract, and engage talent is to leverage your employer brand, right? So, so branding has to be I think when you talk about best practices, right, leveraging your brand and to source talent directly is essentially what direct sourcing is. At least that's the point of view that we have. There are interesting models where you can have a supplier who is playing in the direct sourcing model, leverage their brand to bring talent in, but it's a journey to start there and maybe get to where you really have to use your brand. And I'm trying to read the question. There was some, I think it was a two-part question. Connor, what was the other half of the question, if you don't mind?
Yeah, so I guess Ronald has a really good question, Saleem, but the second part of my question actually was, when you're speaking to the enterprise, have you had any difficulties with using or getting permission for the employer brand? That's something typically we've faced here at CXC in terms of getting a direct sourcing solution off the ground. So that was the second part of the question. Yeah,
I mean, there is a huge concern with that, right? And partly because it has to do with the teams that are involved being completely disjointed, right? So there is a little bit of a change management process that needs to take place internally in an organization to align everyone, put proper governance model in place so everyone knows that the brand is not getting diluted, right? And I think one of the things that organizations need to embrace, or at least, when you guys are talking to organizations, trying to tell them that using the brand is important, is to make sure that they understand, that that whole branding that's going to get used to attract talent is going to model off of the same framework that's used to attract and retain and make customers brand advocates, right? So it's definitely a conversation that needs to take place. It's a change management activity. It's an alignment of, how you think about talent in this new world that needs to happen. But yeah, organizations are extremely concerned about it, right? Because they don't want TA teams that are talking directly to talent, speaking about a brand in a way that's not consistent with how the brand was built by everyone else in the organization, right?
I think there are two trends that that are worth mentioning here, and one is when we started with direct sourcing programs, there were a lot of, and there are still in the market, there are a lot of urban legends around co-employment risks. When you use your employer brand, and all of a sudden everybody becomes a perm employee, right? And I've read a couple of labor law paragraphs all over the world, and I've not read any law that says you cannot treat your contingent workers with respect and dignity and fairness. So I don't think the pure usage of the employer brand will create problems in co-employment. Where you have to be careful is, of course, once you engage them in a talent community, that you communicate very clearly what this talent community is about, that it's a contingent community, that the people will be payroll, that maybe the company you're working with will not be the employer of record in the end. Be consistent in communicating that throughout the funnel. That's very important. And then, of course, job compliance, the contractor compliance. I mean, Connor, you can talk much more to it than I can. But I think that's actually where the trouble comes in, and not so much the use of the employer brand. Nevertheless, there's the perception when you start to discuss that with a company that the use of the employer brand will bring these huge compliance risks, which I don't think is a valid concern. And the second thing, I think, and I'm with Saleem, I think in a couple of years from now, this problem will be, the use of the employer brand problem will be solved, because I think a lot of it comes, as Saleem said, from the internal disconnect between procurement and HR. HR is the owner of employer brand, and all of a sudden procurement, wants to use this employer brand, and everybody's overly concerned around the reputation in the market. When we look at the mature programs and the trend towards total talent, HR is taking much more ownership in contingent recruitment than they have, 5 to 10 years ago. And I believe as they will see success in leveraging as they have seen success in leveraging their contingent brand, their employer brand in perm recruitment, they will naturally also try this in contingent. So I think we'll overcome this. It's a typical change process, right? We are changing a process within a procurement department, and people need to adopt.
Yeah, I agree, and there's some really interesting comments in the chat. Marlene from Next Economy has made a really good point there on the employer brand for the organization VRT. So worth a look. But Thomas, I share your view. I don't think the employer brand creates a compliancy risk, but it might not sound as sexy. But if we describe maybe the employer brand as the end user brand, that might help us in our messaging. But it doesn't sound quite as glamorous, of course. I see a question from John Healy there, a friend of CXC and a friend of our various shows. John, I might invite you in a few minutes when we talk about talent marketing and talent curation to maybe just come on and give some of your insights and experience, even though we didn't invite you to the roundtable as a speaker today, but love to hear from you. But if we can move on, Roland, Thomas, and Saleem, my view on direct sourcing is that it works best where the roles are, I guess, commoditized, or at least strikingly similar, right? So you've got tier 1 help desk support, tier 2 help desk support, Java developer A, Java developer B, right? If you think about that big bank A example I gave earlier, where you've got big bank A coming to you guys and saying, hey, listen, we need 1,000 Java developers, 100 administrators, 50 BAs, 20 bottle washers, or whatever the hell the role is. My view is that direct sourcing doesn't work quite as well in that second scenario. So the question for you, Thomas, Saleem, and Roland, is there, do the commodity type roles work better in a direct sourcing model, or what's your view in those two scenarios that I've outlined?
So I think direct sourcing works well when there is a large volume or scale of numbers, because it's a repeatable action that you can carry on again and again. Where a lot of time can be lost is spending too much time trying to have a direct sourcing strategy for roles that don't come up often enough, or so rare and hard to find that maybe, you know what, that's the right time to use a recruitment agency who specializes in that area and just carry on in that space. And I don't think, you know, direct sourcing is something that it's black and white. You either do it 100% or not. There's probably the right time and the place. Certainly where it's popular in demand skills, and if you're using talent platforms, it's where someone's probably already done the hard work for you. You know, if you're looking for 100 Java developers, there's probably another 8 or 9 banks that have been looking for 100 Java developers. And with the aid of technology marketplaces, often they're already talent pooled, and you can use platforms to engage with these people already. So the more popular and the more common the skill, and the more regular, the better, I think. And it's most also when there's a need for repeat hiring, when it's not just a one-off engagement. Some freelancers or contractors, you might only need them once, but if you're always going to have to engage them again and again and again, that's when it works very well.
Thomas?
Yeah, I agree. I agree. I always say, you know, you have to look at it through the eyes of a talent. And when you're engaging with a brand into a talent community, and you set certain expectations, and then the brand has, you know, won a requisition in 3 years for your expertise, then, and you don't hear from them, you know, how would you like feel engaged with this brand? And in that context, you know, why would I engage somebody as a brand that I only need like every 3 years? I think there are done verticals, you know, like, I would even consider a platform like HackerRank, right? They focus on a vertical and they engage these workers really well. And they engage them on a daily basis, basically, or on a weekly basis or whatever. And then you can tap into this talent pool of engaged workers. If you only have a job every three years, then you can't engage a large community of workers in that field. So there needs to be a certain repetitive volume to be able to nurture this community and to make it relevant for the talent that is in the community.
Agree.
Yeah,
Saleem?
I agree with both, you know, Roland and Thomas. But the way I would look at this is, when you look at your workforce composition, right, you'll have certain role types that are extremely critical for your organization to maintain competitive advantage. Right, those role types will almost always be handled through your perm hire channels, right? So now if you look at the contingent pool, now you would segregate them into, I would say, 2 or 3 different buckets, right? There are ones that are hard to fill, like Roland was saying. It could take extremely, it's a lot of effort that's involved in, you know, going after talent, convincing them to work, and those type of roles will still continue to be sourced through like specialized, you know, suppliers that exist in your ecosystem. And I think this is something that also, as part of promoting direct sourcing, we need to start educating, you know, the supplier community, right? Where there is this concern, okay, direct sourcing is going to come, are we going to not exist, right? But you are going to exist because there's a certain set of roles that only specialized teams can fill. It's not to say that, you know, your direct sourcing teams won't be able to fill, but it's just not efficient, right? So it's those, you know, common high volume type of positions that actually, you know, if you go back to the comments we made initially, right, with the whole demand planning and forecasting stuff, right? So those are kind of the things that when they fluctuate, you would go towards this direct sourcing channel. So yeah, I'm completely aligned with the way you know, Thomas and Roland think about it.
Great stuff. Thank you, folks. John Healy has a question. John, would you mind unmicing yourself and just elaborating on your question. For those that don't know John, John is a 30-year plus veteran of the outsourcing and human capital industry. He does not look it, of course. He's also heavily involved in the World Employment Confederation. John, great to see you. What is your question, please, sir?
Always happy to hear you, Connor, and you got a great group here. I guess my question, when I see direct sourcing brought up as frequently as it is right now, I'm often seeing too many companies who are not getting the value that they want out of it, that they're in essence building a database of additional people, whether they're silver medalists or whatever type of candidate profile that they're putting in there. And so what I'm curious about is whether or not you guys are seeing a migration to getting to know the talent any better. In other words, if I put a silver medalist into the pool and 6 months later, I haven't gotten to know them any better, the odds of them being a silver medalist again is still pretty high. So are you seeing people engaging, whether it's crowdsourcing type models or contests within their open talent communities, to start leveraging this group of people to get to know them any better?
Great question, John. Who wants to take that, chaps?
Well, I especially on your last point, John, about the contests idea with crowdsourcing, that's a really good way to engage with a community when you're not doing them. One of our key customers, IBM, use that tool really effectively. They've got a pool of freelancers that they use to complete specific tasks on a project basis, but they also use the contest platform as a way of engaging with the community, highlighting and marketing the idea that they exist, publicizing the prizes, and it's a really good way to keep people engaged as well. I think on the key about how well you get to know the talent really depends again on the type of skills and the type of engagement and the purposes for what you're wishing to know them for. Because what I really like is hearing the stories that individual freelancers, the relationships they have with their customers over a long period of time. And they might be in another country, the other side of the world, and they've been with this one hiring manager, and the hiring manager's taken them with them for a few moves to different organizations, and they've always supported on their design work or something like that. And I think there you get a really nice, genuine, intimate connection. I guess what you're talking about more is before that regular hiring, how do you understand the talent pool in more detail and understand what sees them tick? I haven't seen any amazing examples of that I've been involved with, but I'm sure there are, if any of the rest of the panel can enlighten us on anything they've seen.
Yeah, I think, hi, John. So, one of the things that happens is, right, you buy a great piece of technology and then assume it's going to do everything you need to do, or it just doesn't work like that, right? You can't put a treadmill and expect to just watch and lose weight, right? So what happens is there are core functions that go with that technology, right? You have your marketing, which is extremely important to attract the talent, but knowing the talent is the curation aspect of direct sourcing, which people completely forget, right? That is the whole nurturing, listening to talent, and making sure, right, you are adjusting what you're doing to continue to nurture them and accommodate in a right manner, right? So by nurturing, it's not just sending out random surveys and trying to listen to what people are saying, but there's a lot more to it in terms of, right, social sensing and things like that, creating those community forums that have either automated moderation or community-based moderation, right? All those play a role in understanding your talent to make sure that they keep engaged within your community and actually help, drive success towards your direct sourcing programs. I think it's a maturity process, if you ask me, right? Understanding how to properly, curate and nurture your talent community to get to know your community better, right? And again, within your community, you'll have different talent pools. The way you get to know them also varies. So these are some of the things that organizations overlook, and that's where you need a really good services partner that can leverage a technology platform to get to know talent better and adapt and embrace, make changes within their programs to be successful.
I also think, John, that what's underestimated in nurturing the relationships with talent is the power of data and the power of marketing, like data-driven marketing. If you look at how B2C companies engage with their users, and Netflix knows exactly what your favorite shows will be because they know what you watch, how long you watch stuff. And I think a lot of the databases, how you have called it, are very much dependent on the nurturer and on the sourcer that sits behind the screen and performs an action. And we've seen great success. So I haven't any experience with contests or something within the talent community, but we've seen great success with really capturing all micro moments of a user journey into a like event bus kind of repository that we then use for very personal and targeted communication with talent in an automated way. So if we know that a talent, let's say, fails on a skill test or even looks at a job requisition and doesn't start the application process, there could be an algorithm in the back end that would match the skills of the talent that hasn't applied with the job that he has looked at, and then maybe suggest a training or something like that. So there can be engagement that's but you need to start with understanding what the users want. And B2Cs, the B2C businesses are very strong in that piece. The Amazons and the Netflix of this world, they know exactly what you want, what you're looking for, and they have personas and all built up. And if you look at the world of recruitment, it's very much 90-99. You have your databases and you have people basically, sending messages. And I think that's, I'm exaggerating, right? But I think there's a huge opportunity if we can get better in understanding what the talents are looking for, and then we can have more personal engagement communication with them. That's great. I think then the chance that the talent stays engaged with the community is much bigger. And we've run content campaigns, we have run upskilling campaigns, and we've even run emotional campaigns. Just saying thank you, but in the right moment, is a very powerful tool, right? If you know the right moment for the right thank you, it's very powerful. It's not powerful if you send a confirmation, after somebody has applied to a job, thank you, we have received your application, right? That's not powerful. But if you get the right moment in time to say thank you, that can be very powerful.
Yeah, Thomas, I've got a really simplistic view, and John, thank you for the question. I think we've had some really interesting ideas, but my simple view, and Thomas and Saleem and Roland will know me well in this, but my simple view is this: the people are in the talent pool because they want the job with a particular company, right? But my view also is this: they don't want bombarded with 350 bloody jobs a year, right? So how can and if you're automating things, you need to have some really smart algorithms to ensure that doesn't happen. So how can we reward, nurture, and continue to capture the right attention of the workers in that talent pool? I'm really keen to understand if there's any suggestions or ideas around that.
Proper technology, right? License WorkLlama, and we'll show you how to do it. No, the jokes aside, right? Like Thomas said, you get a specific experience when it is done properly, right? Think about Netflix or Amazon. They do things in such a subtle way where it's still personalized but not in your face annoying, right? So it's proper implementation of those technologies that create that personalization, right? So you're not getting those jobs that don't make any sense for you. And it's leveraging the power of data where you're creating that holistic perspective of everyone that's gone through your organization that looks like you. And this is where this kind of ties into the previous discussion we had on, right, how do you get to know your audience? So it's basically using proper automation and AI to make sure that experience is personalized and delivered in a manner where it is relevant to the person who's consuming that message, right? You're dealing with a talent demographic that's not the same, and everyone likes to be engaged in a different way, right? I mean, I'm sure you guys have heard about the whole TikTok resumes now, and all these different channels, right? So there are ways to do it. It's just leveraging proper technology and proper marketing strategies to make it happen. We're not inventing the wheel here. We're just taking how organizations have been successful at dealing with consumers and just turning it inward to apply the same principles to talent. That's basically what we're trying to do.
Thanks, Saleem. Anything to add on this topic, Roland or Thomas?
No, I think
it's been covered from my side.
Roland, you go.
I was just saying, I think your comments had covered all I would have said. Over to you, Thomas.
Okay, thank you. I think Roland's right. Saleem is right. The only thing that I want to emphasize is, it's not the one. I think Saleem said the sentence. You don't buy technology and it will work, right? You need the technology itself is just a little piece, and you need a service layer on top of it. And the service layer is more than just a qualified recruiter nowadays, right? You need performance marketeers, you need CRM marketeers, you need your intelligence people, you need, there's a whole bunch of their whole portfolio. It's a real, like, running a talent pool is a real enterprise. Like, it's a small little startup company where you really have to engage with your users and do, full end-to-end proper marketing. And if you don't do it right, it can hurt your employer brand, right? So you've got to do it right. But if you get it right, there's a huge opportunity. And unfortunately, we, a lot of programs, and I don't know, of course, probably no one in the audience will do that, but a lot of programs just follow their own processes without looking at what the talent actually does. I know many systems where new job requisitions are distributed by email, for example. And then they're distributed by email, and you send one email and nobody, Connor doesn't open it. And you send another email and Connor doesn't open it. And you send another email and Connor doesn't open it. And what do you change? Nothing. You just continue to send Connor emails, and Connor's apparently not interested in new requisition emails. So taking that information that Connor didn't open the last 5 new job emails and making a change, like, changing the channel. Let's try WhatsApp. Let's try text message, or changing the content, reaching out to Connor. Hey, are you not interested for jobs anymore? We see you're not reading that, like, really working with the user on creating a more convenient experience for them is happening in too few cases, I would say.
Yeah, I agree with you all, guys. I've got an interesting question from an old colleague and friend called Owen Curtin, based in Ireland. And Owen's question, guys, is: has the emergence of remote working affected the direct sourcing model or talent marketplace model, or is it too early to say? And I'm going to take Owen's question in a different way, which is: has remote working is the emergence of remote working creating a boon for organizations to hire anyone, anywhere? And Roland, my guess or my assumption would be that a global talent marketplace like freelancer.com is really taking advantage of this move to remote work and hire anyone, anywhere. Is that fair to say? And can you explain a bit around that?
Absolutely. And I'd imagine that the biggest barrier to successful direct hiring programs is access to talent, and that's why people have to pay additional costs to go to other suppliers, because they suddenly can't access the talent. And that talent squeeze has only been getting worse and worse over the years, and it is a real crisis point at the moment. So suddenly there are new options that weren't available to people before, and I think that the whole remote aspect is, as we've worked on assignments before, Connor, there's a lot of compliance things to consider and make sure you've got things set up. But suddenly you've got all of these new talent pools of people all around the world, that not only can you have new talent, sometimes you can pay a lot less for the talent, sometimes you can have abundance of skills in other ways where you couldn't. You can bring, a huge diversity of thought to your organization in ways that you haven't done. And yes, in short, it's obviously been a big boom. And I see that as one of the big major trends in staffing over the next decade, the globalization of work.
Yeah, I agree. Thomas, Saleem, what's your take on this trend for, I guess, borderless hiring? And if borderless hiring and remote working are here to stay, do direct sourcing programs have a role to play?
Well, first of all, I believe it's here to stay. I think COVID accelerated a lot of the trends that were anyway evolving, and it showed us, it forced us to work remotely with each other. And even the most conservative companies noticed that actually, it's nice to be in an office around colleagues, and it has advantages. But as a backup, the remote work scenario works. Kind of, most of the businesses did not die because their employees were working from home, and all of a sudden they noticed. Additionally, the paradox of our working market at the moment and the scarcity of labor is forcing companies to go in new ways. These two things combined lead to the fact that companies are more open now to hire all over the world because they've learned that it's possible, and scarcity is always local. I would say on a global scale, there are very few roles that are really very scarce. So if you open up your hiring profile geographically, I think you'll be much more successful if you want to find a data scientist in San Francisco that's available as of next month, right? That's just very difficult. So I think this is here to stay, and I think companies will need to adopt to it. Will talent pools necessarily help? Maybe, because all of a sudden the remote workers have exposure to the requisitions of a company, even though they have no engagement with the local supplier that traditionally supplied labor into that program. So yes, it can help, but I think that the trend itself is so strong that it will manifest in all ways of sourcing. I think we'll see all suppliers basically sourcing global into a program, and I think the trend will have a significant impact on the staffing industry itself, because you all know probably the staffing market and how fragmented it is, and I think that the reason why the staffing market has always been so fragmented is that it was a very local market, or it is a very local market for a lot of roles, and the mom and pop shop sitting in the middle of nowhere just has an advantage in that field because they know the university, they know the field. As more and more hiring is getting global, I think the global players have a significant advantage. And there's huge growth and change potential in the industry, I think.
I agree. Saleem, what's your thoughts on this topic?
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree with what both Thomas and Roland mentioned, right? I think this, in fact, if anything, the addressable market of talent, right, for anyone trying to implement direct sourcing programs has just exploded, right? You now have a very large addressable talent market, so to speak, but then it brings with it its own set of challenges as it relates to, talent marketing and how do you leverage your talent brand, because in the past, if you looked at things within geographical boundaries, your strategies and what you used, right, could be very localized and work very well. But now you have to look at it from a global scale. So it brings with it a little bit of complexity. And that's where, organizations like, Roland's have an advantage because they have facilitated and orchestrated some of these things already, right? So they kind of know how to deal with a global talent footprint without any geographical boundaries. So yeah, I mean, it's actually, I think, a good thing that's happened. And in fact, it's going to help organizations wanting to go the direct sourcing route. It's just that, the service layer now needs to get a little more sophisticated, so to speak.
Yeah, I agree, guys. And we're probably going to skip a couple of topics here just in the interest of time, but we are hosting another webinar on the 15th of December, which I hope you guys will join me on to discuss post-pandemic, although you could argue we're still in the middle of a pandemic in certain locations, of course, but post-pandemic hiring. So in that, we're going to focus on the labor market paradox, talent scarcity, and some of the strategies that companies like yours can facilitate to maybe solve those problems. So just before we finish up, guys, we've got 5 minutes, and thanks, of course, to our audience for sticking with us for what's been a really fascinating roundtable. But if I could start with you, Roland, what is your view on the future of sourcing? Where is it going in your view? And I suppose we'll give you a minute.
I remember once, about 5 years ago, when I worked in a recruitment agency, getting into a rather heated debate with someone on LinkedIn who was trying to tell me that technology was going to take my job away and the recruitment industry was over, and I thought he was mad. But then times moved on, and I switched side and play for the technology side now, and I can only see that trend of technology having a more and more involved role in the whole sourcing landscape. I think that's for sure. You know, people are still going to be involved at different points, but it's going to be more and more driven by that technology side. And I think that the skills required by internal recruitment and HR functions in large organizations are going to have to change. And they're going to have to become more technology experts. I'm not talking about developing and building their own stuff, but just understanding the technology landscape, being able to compare different suppliers, and being able to bring together this architecture of different technology platforms and suppliers who can really give them that advantage to be able to attract and retain and source talent.
Thanks, Roland. Thomas, same question to you, please.
Yeah, I agree. I think but let me start from a different angle. I think we've seen historically contingent and perm recruitment being totally separated. I think this will change. I think if we're looking ahead, we'll see more total talent programs. We'll see more synergies between perm and contingent. How can we, place a silver medalist on a contingent role until we have a permanent position? How can we, leverage interns? How do we know when they're ready with university, and then whether they go into contingent or perm jobs? Like, all of these flows we'll see. And we see already the first technology, actually, because so far also the technology, the VMS and the ATS are disconnected. The HRIS for internal mobility is a third system. You had your internal mobility systems, you had your upskilling systems, you had your talent pooling systems in perm, you had your talent pooling systems in contingent. All of this will, I think, blend somehow into a central place where all accessible talents reside, and then certain workflows. So I think, yes, Ronald, totally technology will enable a different service model for HR going forward. What's important for me to say is I don't think that technology will be technology enables a model that is more, that's maybe more convenient, higher pace, or brings higher transparency to talent and to recruiters. But technology itself will not be the model. It's not Netflix that killed Blockbuster. It's the business model behind the streaming, and that it's in time, that it's convenient. That's the reason why it was successful. And technology is evolving, and therefore new models will arise. So I'm totally with Ronald. The role of internal HR, of procurement, of service providers like Randstad in organizations will change because technology will enable them to do different things. But I think it's a very much blended workforce approach and I don't think one source, if we go to the supply chain, I think there will be suppliers. I think there will be marketplaces. I think there will be direct sourcing programs. I don't think there's a winner takes it all scenario.
No, not yet. Although I'm sure someone would like that. And Saleem, we'll leave you with the last word on that topic.
No, I think, I keep saying every time you come to me, I agree with what Thomas and Roland said, because they're saying really great stuff. And 100% what they said, right? The only thing I would add is it's going to be a lot more data driven, right? And it's all going to take that holistic perspective of all your talent needs, regardless of work arrangements. right? And right now, I think is the time is ripe because you have the right type of technologies that can actually facilitate that. So yeah, no, very well said, Roland and Thomas.
Well, thank you, Saleem. Thank you, Thomas, and thank you, Roland, and of course to all of our audience for participating in today's roundtable. Guys, that was absolutely fascinating, and thank you to everyone for their questions today. They were really interesting questions, and I hope we've addressed them. So we'll be putting a summary of the recording out on our various digital platforms, and please feel free to link in with Saleem, Thomas, or Roland on LinkedIn. Their handles are in the chat. So wishing you all a pleasant weekend, or sorry, pleasant afternoon ahead. I'm getting ahead of myself here. The holidays are coming a bit too quick, it seems, but wishing you all a pleasant day ahead, guys. And thanks so much for joining us today, and look forward to seeing you on the 15th of December. Take care, folks. Thank you.
Thank you.